now, like a few years on, like, I don't think I am okay yet, and there's a lot to deal with. And now you're dealing with these teenagers that don't know how to socialize. They addicted to video games. They're addicted to scrolling because we actually taught them to be addicted because that's how, talk to your friends online, And so I think having that hub is so necessary to help families and kids because, what, I'm not going to, unless I'm like really, really at that stage, even I'm not going to phone someone and say I need help, right? So I know that a teenager is not going to be phoning a helpline and saying I need help. They need a place to go where they can maybe play pool or something, connect with people, and then it's going to come out naturally.
They need to develop that trust and know that person that they go to is a safe person for them. And that's the thing that we hear over and over and over for kids, that sense of needing to feel safe and not judged.
Yeah.
And so, I think the things that you talk about, so many people experience that during COVID. And I think that whether you say it's the silver lining in COVID, but I think we all kind of recognized our mental health vulnerabilities.
Welcome back to Hear Me Out with Belinda. Today, we're sitting down with Lorie Anne Schultz from the Foothills Community Coalition. But before we welcome her in studio, if you're enjoying the content of the channel, please like and subscribe. Welcome to the studio, Lorie.
Well, thank you for having me here today.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the Foothills Community Coalition?
Yeah, good question. It's probably not very well known. So the Foothills Community Coalition is a group of dedicated leaders in the region of the Foothills who have worked for, organizations, school divisions, health services, community services. And we've come together for a lot of years around trying to realize the vision of building an integrated youth services hub in the region of the Foothills. And so you might kind of question, well, what is an integrated youth services hub? Well, what that is we called it a one-stop shop or a one-stop place where youth ages 11 to 24 can come and receive services, mental health services, social services, employment services, health services, all in one place. We've heard over years and years and years that it's difficult to navigate the health system and it's difficult to figure out, how to get access to free services. And so we're just trying to remove that barrier of accessing supports for youth and their families so that they just need to come to one place. And we will be providing, some services, but also we're going to be able to, educate and link kids and families to the supports and services that they need.
Wow. And so then going back, you've been working on this for a couple of years, you said.
Well, yes. We've really only been in existence for about a year. But prior to that, the previous iteration, the work sort of sat with the Foothills Children's Wellness Network, which evolved into the network. For people who, live in the region of the Foothills, they would recognize the Foothills Children's Wellness Network. We've been around since, we were around since, 2011, 2012. And it was really initially about providing supports and services or linking supports and services for families who had children at the ages of 1 to 5. And for years, we, really worked to coordinate services and help families, raise happy, healthy children was their sort of the mantra. And then started noticing that youth were really starting to struggle, and families really, didn't really have the tools that they needed to be able to support youth and adolescents. And so the leaders that worked for these organizations and agencies started to try and understand what the needs are. There were needs assessments that were done in the community to really sort of start to kind of figure out, well, what are the challenges that youth are struggling with, and I think that the reality and living in a town outside of a major city is that there's just not the breadth of supports that are available, and it's the distance is difficult for people to go to get access supports and services in Calgary, and there was just not the same. While there are some supports and services, free supports and services through the school divisions, for example, with primary health care. There just wasn't the breadth of supports and services, free supports and services for families to be able to access mental health supports, for example. And we knew that kids were starting to really struggle even before COVID.
I think what comes to mind is I used to live in Calgary, and, if you go downtown Calgary, unfortunately, you do see some of the homeless and a lot of other things. But being in Okotoks, we don't actually see that. So I think it's almost easy to think that we don't have that need within our town, right? And so it sounds like this is not a new thing within Okotoks and the foothills. It sounds like it's been going on. Do you feel like the mental health crisis is getting worse? Have you seen changes?
Yeah. Well, I think in a small town, it looks different, right?
Okay.
We hear from different agencies that there's lots of couch surfing. So while kids aren't on the streets, kids will be, hanging out at their friend's house, and they'll be couch surfing. Or, some of the things that we've heard locally too is that, kids, maybe might be kicked out of their houses during the day, and they're allowed to return at 11 o'clock at night, and then they're kicked out in the morning. And they might attend school during the day. So I think homelessness, while we haven't really been able to quantify it here, when you start to talk to people that work with youth, they do, acknowledge that, yeah, there is a certain amount of homelessness. There's a certain amount of couch surfing. But oftentimes what happens is that the kids end up going into the city. And then, when we don't provide the supports and services locally that they need, then we lose them to the city. So there's many of, our kids that, are in the region of the foothills that, potentially may be on the streets in
Right.
Calgary or, in other areas too.
Yeah. And if they've left here, then they don't have any supports here, which is what would have been the community that they would have grown up in. So then they are on the streets, right? Because
Yes.
whatever supports they could have accessed
Yes. Yeah.
here.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, mental health struggles, that kids have, and, is it getting worse? And I would say, we had a youth advisory committee, and we've had 3 youth summits that we've supported in the region for the past 4 years. We didn't have one this year, but for the prior 3 years, we brought youth, we brought families, and we brought teachers, we brought agency workers together. And we really listened to what they had to say, and some of the common themes that we hear. Youth were struggling before COVID, um, and I think a large part of that has to do with social media, right? And I think a large part of it has to do with the fact that kids were using. I think about my own kids and the Game Boys that they use. They would go to birthday parties, and they'd be talking to each other through their machines. And so, just that whole sense of not having that typical development, and being able to develop social emotional skills, and to develop, as is necessary for them to be able to develop the confidence and the resilience, was starting to, I think, deteriorate for years. But that social isolation that kids had with
Hmm.
COVID really did a number on our kids. And it happened at a time when their brains weren't fully developed. And we know through research that, it's not just a matter of getting over it and then starting to expose them. But, when immature brains, experience some trauma, it takes an awful long time for those kids to recover from that. So they experienced socialization, and they experienced a lot of stress and anxiety. They stopped being able to, connect with their friends, which we knew, was really difficult. And they didn't develop those skills that were required to be confident and resilient. And so, I've heard over and over and over again, kids tell me that, like that anxiety that they felt during COVID, they still experience that. But now we're living in a world where, I mean, there's a lot of political unrest, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
of stuff that's going on in the world that, they just don't know how to deal with. And, the affordability issue is also really freaking them out. They
Mhm.
don't know if they're going to be able to get a job and work and be able to have the same things that their parents had, for example. So launching our kids has become a lot more difficult, and a lot of my friends have talked about that rebound effect. Like we try and launch our kids, they come back, and
Mhm.
trying to help them into that transition into adulthood has been delayed much longer, and so our kids, just are looking at the world as and the other thing that kids experience too is just the environmental crisis too. They think that we've done a real number on our planet and they just don't tend to have that same hope and aspiration that potentially we did
Good.
growing
Yeah.
up. And so they're experiencing a lot more anxiety. And the other thing that we know about development and disease onset too is that mental health issues start to about 70% of mental health issues start to emerge during adolescence and young in youth. And so, they're not accessing the supports. Only about 25% of kids actually access the supports. 1 in 5 kids struggle with mental health and addiction issues, but only about 20 to 30% of the kids actually get the help that they need. So they're having that sort of, leftover sort of anxiety from COVID. Social media causes a great deal of distress. They're addicted to their phones. They don't know how to get off them. Creates a lot of anxiety and they're not sure about the world and in front of them. And they're really, really struggling. And so we hear this over and over and over again. So we've been hearing this, for the last 3 years in our youth summits and talking about how we're going to address these challenges. What are we
Mhm.
going to do as a community? We know we don't have the same number of supports that are available, like in Calgary, for example. And so the concept of this youth hub kind of was floated around. We need to create these spaces where youth feel safe to be able to come and actually maybe hang out, start to feel trust, start to feel like they can actually go to someone and say, I need help,
Mhm.
but also is a place for them to feel that they can actually connect with somebody too, like a peer,
Yeah.
and learn those skills. So it's really about creating these safe spaces in our communities where youth can come, knock on one door, and get the help that they need. But also families are struggling too, and they can come to these um, places to be able to access the supports that they need for their youth. But also be able to participate and learn about how they can approach their children, how they can, learn the skills to be able to help their children as well.
Yeah, I think you've touched on quite a lot of factors within that. So I'll just go back to COVID and pre COVID having younger boys. So I remember actually during COVID, the first thing is yes, now everybody's online. So we actually taught them to interact with each other either on video games or online. So they lost that ability to go outside together and to, play soccer or kick a ball and connect in that
Hmm.
way. And depending on the age they were during COVID, I don't think they ever got that ability to relearn that skill. I'm seeing that
Exactly.
particularly with my youngest sons, in just started high school, and I can see that in
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
age group over
He's not
there.
the only one.
No, that's I can see it
Yeah.
with all of them.
Yeah.
But then, actually, from the parent point of view, and going back to my COVID experience, um, I remember my oldest son needed to go online for his first, I think it was Google Classroom or Google Meet at the time. And if anybody knows me, they know I am not great with setting up IT stuff because my husband works in IT. So I kind of leave it all
I'm
to him.
exactly the same, Belinda.
And my husband was obviously having his own stress at moving online and doing work and stuff. And I'd asked him to set up the son's computer. There's some miscommunication. It wasn't set up. My oldest one was upset that something was going wrong. And I did not realize that the mic was on. And of course, I had a complete meltdown on the phone because it was just too much. Like saying, like, pretty much, I'm pretty sure I used some very foul language and that I can't do this anymore and this is ridiculous. And, and the entire classroom heard me.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, poor you. Oh, I'm
And
sorry it's happened to you.
to the point that the teacher was very concerned and good for her that she actually called me afterwards
Good for
and
her.
said, do I need to intervene? And I was like, no, I'm really sorry. I did not know the mic was on. And number two, like, my kids are safe. You can check in with them, but I just needed to have that meltdown. I'm fine. I can cope now. But I wasn't okay, and I think
What
that,
parent was?
right?
Right.
And then now, like a few years on, like, I don't think I am okay yet, and there's a lot to deal with. And now you're dealing with these teenagers that don't know how to socialize. They addicted to video games. They're addicted to scrolling because we actually taught them to be addicted because that's how, talk to your friends online, And so I think having that hub is so necessary to help families and kids because, I'm not going to, unless I'm like really, really at that stage, even I'm not going to phone someone and say I need help, right? So I know that a teenager is not going to be phoning a helpline and saying I need help. They need a place to go where they can maybe play pool or something, connect with people, and then it's going to come out naturally.
They need to develop that trust and know that person that they go to is a safe person for them. And that's the thing that we hear over and over and over for kids, that sense of needing to feel safe and not judged.
Yeah.
And so, I think the things that you talk about, so many people experience that during COVID. And I think that whether you say it's the silver lining in COVID, but I think we all kind of recognized our mental health vulnerabilities. And, before that, it has always been a bit of it's, when someone in your family or you had mental health issues, you don't want to talk about it. It was the elephant in the room, or it was, it's the dirty little secret, right? And it's always been stigmatized. And I think that, we started to recognize our vulnerabilities, and you mentioned that that sort of emotional regulation was just really difficult for everybody. But imagine kids whose brains aren't fully developed, they don't have those skills, and then they see their parents. Learning self-regulation skills are things that kids learn from their parents. I know that because I'm an occupational therapist by background, and I am specialized in pediatric rehabilitation and child development, and these are skills that kids have to learn. And so when they're abrupted, or when you have an environment where things become more difficult, and you don't have those peers, or you don't or parents are really struggling, kids actually learn those skills, right? And so much of treating kids and helping kids develop that social regulation, is really a parent and child thing too, because the parent is the one that's modeling that. And the teachers were having meltdown in schools, right? I mean, they saw it everywhere, right? And so they didn't develop those skills. And so, it's to your point about, having a place locally. I think one of the issues that we experience when, the government doesn't invest the same amount of money in specialized services in small communities, because there's just, I think, an expectation that, well, if they, provide a support and service in the city of Calgary, for example, families can access those supports there. But the reality is, like you said, kids won't necessarily, and they can't
They can't get there.
But the other thing that we hear over and over again with youth is that, the services are only open from like 8 until 4 o'clock. And kids are in schools, and
Mhm.
these supports are not open on weekends, and they're not open on in the evenings. And that's when kids and families could actually access those supports. Now, we know that there are some supports in schools for sure, and those are great, but those are stretched too.
Mhm.
Yeah, so they're not accessible. People have to drive long distances. The operating hours, are just don't coincide with when kids and families could actually get those
Mhm.
services. And, like we know that kids will, wait until 10 o'clock at night to go to the urgent care because they don't want anybody to see them either,
Mhm.
right? So there's all of these barriers to accessing mental health supports. And one of the things that we learned about how kids access supports and services is that the first people they talk to are actually their friends
Yeah.
and families. But you've got these kids who are struggling, and they connect with their friends, they tell their friends things, and you've got these kids who are shouldering all of these tremendous burdens of each other's supports, of each other's mental health
Mhm.
struggles, and they don't know what to do with that too. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of pressure and stress on our kids.
There's a lot of pressure and stress
Yeah.
on the kids, and
Yeah.
exactly that. I think they do. They need that space where they can go to, and within the local community, and for the parents as well.
Yeah.
And I think also a lot of times we have third party benefits, or
Mhm.
that's not enough. It
Not
maybe
enough.
tapes. It will maybe pay for 2 or 3 sessions with someone.
Yeah.
And then I remember a friend of mine who managed to get her child, this was a few years ago, into actual counseling through Alberta Health Services. But she had to wait almost
Mhm.
12
Oh,
weeks
no.
before the child could actually get in there. Now, that 12 week is, I think, is such a critical period, right? Because you don't know what's actually happened. Was there a bullying instance, and, like what's going on in that child's mind? Like, and so as a parent, I know my friend wasn't sleeping, right? Because she was watching her child all the time because she
Afraid.
didn't know what to do.
Yes. Mhm.
And where was the help? Like, there was no help, right?
No.
So going back to, um, we need to get that mental health help out there for our kids because it will help the parents as well.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
yeah.
Uh, You know, uh, I've heard so many stories from families about kids that are really struggling, and even schools. That they'll send kids to the emergency, and they wait around in emergency for hours and hours and hours, and it takes an awful lot for a kid to they have to be suicidal, I think, and actively suicidal to get admitted into a hospital bed. But oftentimes what happens is these kids could potentially be suicidal, or um, be emotionally just not able to attend school. They're not eating, they could be cutting. I mean, there's all sorts of things that
Mhm.
families are experiencing, and so they take their kids to emergencies. They may or may not be admitted. When they're not admitted, they go home, and like you mentioned, Belinda, that these kids won't go to school,
Mm.
and family members are terrified to leave their kids alone,
Alone. Yeah.
right? And the help, they may get, supports in 2 or 3 months. And, what do you do in those 2 or 3 months? You're, living with a
Mm.
child who, you're terrified that they're going to harm themselves. You don't want
Yeah.
to go to work, and that's difficult on you, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes, in families too, parents might be struggling with their own mental health issues.
Yeah. Or even then that puts that financial burden on, right? Because
Absolutely.
that parent wants to stay home, but they need to put food on the table,
Yes.
right? So then there's conflict between,
Yes.
husband and wife. And I
Absolutely.
think the cycle just keeps going. And so it brings to mind when I was doing a little bit of research into, talking about today and the youth hub, and going on to, but, Alberta is supposed to be a very prosperous province, right? And so why do we not have a youth hub in Okotoks? Why is it even a question? Like, why is there not, why isn't it just not easily done? And here is the money for the youth hub. Let's look after our community. Let's look after our children. Raise these, beautiful adults that can then,
Let's invest in our kids and our future, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Why? You raise a really good question. I think historically, governments have not put the funding that, and I don't think, I know from the research, they have historically not invested the required supports that are needed for mental health supports, number one. So it has just not been a priority. I think that when you have limited money, you have to deal with the most pressing issue and what's sexy and political. And so, you've got health funds that, there's competing interests with hips and knees. I mean, you hear about all of
Mm-hmm.
the, wait times for hips and knees, and we have an aging population, all the baby boomers, and, all their joints are failing. And so, so there's money that's being spent in developing, clinics, even privatizing clinics outside of the public health system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, cardiac surgery, cancer treatment, and all of those things. And so, they have not invested the same amount of money into the mental health supports that are required. I think that the other thing too is that for an awful long time they just sort of expected that, well, we have mental health services here, but they're not youth-focused mental supports,
Mm-hmm.
health supports. They don't specialize in the developmental age of kids. And so it's more generalized supports. Well, we know that it's you do need to have some expertise to be able to address the challenges that kids are having, and you need to have the breadth of supports and services. And we just don't have that in our community services. So we know that the government hasn't prioritized mental health, and it has always been, underfunded, and there's a stigma involved in it, and so yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to me that that if you actually we know that for every $2, for every $1 invested in mental health supports for youth, that you receive a return of $2. So we know that actually, if you can invest in supports and services for youth at a younger age, that the outcomes will
Mm-hmm.
be so much better. We know that kids will stay in school longer. Kids will get, their employment. They will be able to get jobs. We know that if you invest in diseases earlier on, you have better outcomes. And so we know from the research now that if you do invest in youth mental health supports and services, that the benefit is the outcomes are so much better, but also that they don't have to spend money on crisis intervention, right? We know that we can reduce emergency wait times if you can do early intervention. And
Yeah.
so I think that our governments have been focusing too much on crisis management, and there has not been enough focus on prevention.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can explore on that even a bit more. You're right. But it's time, I think, to get the communities together, because I've really spoken about how I felt in my own business here, the connection of the community, how they embraced me, how they came for a circle when I joined the Rotary Club,
Mm.
to volunteer, feel back. And so we really need communities to get behind
Mm.
and to say,
We want
we want this,
different.
we need it,
Yes,
and go to, municipal government, provincial, and
absolutely.
then, even federal, because going back to my research with this, there were several questions coming up, and I think you have to ask it as to why Canada spends so much money sending it to other people, other countries, when we're the ones working for it and we're the ones suffering, right? It's our kids that are suffering and paying the price. We want that money to stay here, look after our community, our citizens, our residents, and then you can invest,
Yes, yes,
in the future and stuff. And I think that's very valid, their
absolutely.
points coming
Absolutely,
through.
absolutely. I think that the decisions that have been made in healthcare, there could have been better decisions around what's funded. Absolutely. Um, And, even, federally, the amount of money that's invested, I think there needs to be, there is a there is, this youth hub concept is something that is still relatively new. It started actually in Australia. It seems like so many really great, innovative ideas come out of Australia, and then it takes so much time for us to actually implement them. But Alberta has been a little bit late to the game in terms of adopting these integrated youth hubs. I think that it started in BC with Foundry. we know that I can't remember how many foundries there are in BC. I think there might be 4 or 5 foundries in BC, and again, that's that concept of an integrated youth services hub. But Ontario have Waihoos. They've got about 28 or 30 of them. Quebec have them. The province of Saskatchewan has just implemented their integrated services hub with a brand. In Alberta, the provincial brand is called Kickstand, and we are advocating very strongly to bring a Kickstand hub to the region of the Foothills. The government has the federal government has just given a grant to the province, and the province has also contributed some money. And currently, there are 4 or 5 Kickstand sites started with PolicyWise years ago. And they they made an announcement that they're going to be supporting 5 additional youth hubs across the province. And so we're waiting for an announcement to happen with the provincial government around that spread and scale of the Kickstand brand. We're hoping that we are going to be a community. We've done a ton of work to advocate on behalf of being at that state of readiness to adopt a hub in the region. We've had the mayors of Okotoks and the mayor of High River and the towns support an advocacy letter to say that we need we are ready. We want to be that that sort of that region that is going to be the next community, but we just don't know. I think it's sitting on some bureaucrat's desk, and it's just taken an awful long time to implement these across the region of Alberta. I'm hoping that we're going to be one of the communities, but yeah, I agree with you 100%. Why is it that that we're late to the game for a province that has so much resources?
Exactly. And so I think while we wait to find out, for those youth and families that are struggling right now, I mean, I know that there is the mental wellness line in Alberta.
Yes.
But what would you recommend? Is there anything you could, if like a teenager or a mom that's like struggling with a teenager, what would you recommend they do?
Well, I think that they should talk to their physician, their family physician. And, one of the things we know too, that there has been a lack of family physicians, and, families end up having to go to emergency or urgent care to actually get the, help that they need. So, there has been more investment in getting family physicians into our communities. But I think, first of all, talk to your family doctor. I think if you're struggling, we know that, there are some supports and services in schools. Schools are really struggling, but, if a child feels that they have a connection with their teacher, I would suggest talking to their teacher and getting some school supports. There are a number of like Kickstand online. They can go online and receive some online supports. And I think that just reaching out to someone you trust to say, I need some support, I think is the first step. Yeah. And again, we have urgent cares here, and there are Access Mental Health with Recovery Alberta is the new branch of used to be there used to be mental health supports in Alberta Health Services, but there's now Recovery Alberta, which is the new sort of arm of mental health.
Okay.
And so reaching out to Access Mental Health. But again, sometimes, you can't talk to someone right away. And I think that that's probably one of the issues that, and it's why we need to do things differently for youth, is that, when they reach out and they finally get the courage to say, I need help, our system is set up in such a way that it's okay, but we'll get back to you. Right.
Yeah.
But if you need help now and you're being told over and over again, just wait, kids won't reach out.
No. And they'll actually, and then they'll tell their friend, I try to reach out, nothing happened. So then that person's not going to bother, right? Because that's how the circle goes together. So I think, I think just the message out to anybody listening is, if you can help, shout from the rooftops. Let's get an integrated youth hub here in Okotoks to support Okotoks in the foothills.
Absolutely.
And if you are struggling, reach out to your teacher or your physician or urgent care. And it may not be what you need right now, but help will come. Know that there are people that care
Absolutely.
and that they're working towards trying to help you. Yeah.
Well, and I think that the other thing that we've been struggling with to get off the ground that doesn't exist right now, and the position that I had with the Foothills Community Coalition was to try and kind of have we um, used to be a project on the side of our desks, and we needed to have a dedicated individual to launch the work and go around and apply for proposals, or write proposals, apply for funds. It doesn't happen. It's not all going to be funded through um, the provincial or federal government if we're successful and we become a kickstand site. But connecting with people who have influence, and I think that the community coming together to support it is something that is going to be required for it to be sustainable, because it costs money. And we need to be able to hire the people that are going to be able to provide the services. So connecting with people with influence to be able to help raise the money so that we can continue to provide the supports that are necessary for the community, I think is probably the long-term sort of critical issue, because I think we recognize that this is going to be a service that is going to be funded through philanthropic and fundraising opportunities. And so really getting the community to rally behind, we need this. We need to invest in our youth. Our youth are struggling. Our families, we want healthy families. We want healthy communities. We want resilient kids. And we need to invest in this.
Yeah, we need to invest now, right? For a better future for everyone.
We can't wait. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the message, right? We can't wait. The waiting time is now over.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, we need to invest now.
Yes.
Before we close up, Lorie Anne, is there anything else you'd like to tell our listeners today?
I think that having the courage to say I need help, and to reach out and get the help that you need is really important. I think that mental health is going to continue to be a dirty little secret until we actually start to normalize it and embrace the fact that that there are periods in our life where we all struggle, and that's okay. And we're going to get through this by getting the supports that we need and learning and growing. And it's through that, getting through hard times and knowing that, you can do hard things is what's going to help people develop and be more resilient and help them thrive in their life. And so having the courage to ask for help, I think is, it starts there.
Yeah. Ask for help. And if it's not immediate, maybe, don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
And know that there are people out there that are really working hard to try and develop those supports in the community.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for talking about the Foothills Community Coalition and the need for the Youth Hub here. It was lovely to chat with you today.
I so appreciate the opportunity, Belinda. Thank you.
You're welcome.